Welcome to The Word Revealed with David Palmer and Scott Burns, where we talk about everything Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Let's join the conversation.
Welcome back to The Word Revealed. I'm David Palmer with my good friend Scott Burns, fellow lover of Christ and His Word, and the book of Acts in particular. Scott Burns, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm blessed and seeking to be a blessing.
I love it.
We're in Acts 27 today. We're getting close to the end of the book. Acts 27 is the story of a shipwreck. Have you ever had a trip not go as planned, David?
I have. I have had many trips actually not go as planned. I spent a week in an atomic bomb shelter. That was an unplanned trip.
I've not heard that story.
That's a story worth telling. Maybe on another episode.
All
We'll
right.
placehold that. Yeah, I spent a week in an atomic bomb shelter because of a train accident. So the trains were shut down, but we didn't know why for a week. That was an unplanned trip. I've had some adventures. I've gotten lost. I've had lots of plane delays, flight cancellations, taking wrong turns and driving, and then I've had a few adventures on the water. So on our honeymoon we were sailing. We weren't sailing. We were on a medium-sized ferry in the Aegean with a above average size storm that came up, and my natural curiosity kind of got the better of me, and I thought, boy, this boat is really moving. These waves are really high. They look really cool. And I thought, I want to get a good look at this on the deck.
This sounds like David Palmer.
Okay, so I went up on the deck to kind of look around, and just about got blown off the deck. So have a very funny picture from my honeymoon of me gripping the railing of this ferry with my clothes looking like the Michelin Man, just completely blown up. Finally, we got a hold of ourselves and went down below and found that everyone else was under the deck, and everyone else was doing what people do when they get caught in a shipwreck, which is say their prayers and start throwing up. So we found a quiet place to have our own solitude. We never lost our food, but it is kind of scary, and especially I've had some other times traveling where in high wind conditions, even in small boats or a large boat, and the sea has to be respected. Yeah, and that's experiencing that with vessels that are fully outfitted with safety equipment and life vests and modern communication tools. But even then, you kind of assess, like, what's the nearest island and can I swim to it? It does cross your mind. So when our kids were little, that was part of the Palmer family training for our family, was like, you have to be able to swim to the nearest island if necessary. So that's part of our household rules.
All right.
So,
well, I've never had any major adventures on the sea. I've had some turbulence in the air that made me a little more prayerful, and I've had some car adventures along the way that left me stranded in the middle of nowhere pre-cell phone, which makes life a little interesting.
Definitely gets your you find out like what skills you really have. Like all of a sudden I'm out here, am I navigating by the stars? Am I treading water? Yeah.
What strikes me about Acts 27 is that in most of those situations when travel isn't going as planned, we're tempted to think all control has been lost and everything's messed up. And in this case, the travel plans going poorly is still within the sovereign hand of God.
Absolutely.
And he looks at Paul and he says, I'm going to get you where you're going.
Deep thought early in the podcast on this. I'm going to just test this out on you in real time. Do you think that Luke's telling us this story at length in this way precisely to make the point you just made? And that he's doing that in a way that echoes the gospel, because the gospel narrative of Luke is really built around this climactic journey of Jesus to Jerusalem, and Jesus ends up crucified but then resurrected, and the reader of the gospel knows, like, this journey is happening by God's design and under his sovereignty.
Yeah.
And this journey of Paul, like, this is Jesus's word to Paul, like, you are going to bear witness of me, and I'm guiding you in this. So what do you think of that?
I think that's definitely part of it. I also think Luke gives such detail in this particular chapter that you're left without any question that he was there.
Absolutely.
And that brings some validity to everything else in the book. He's not just writing from, I heard about this. He's also writing from the perspective of, I was there.
I was in the boat.
You can't give the details that he gives unless you're in the boat.
There are so many details, even like the name of the guy who's watching him, then, and remember that the journey here is framed around Paul's appeal as a Roman citizen that his case be heard by the emperor, by Caesar. And Luke adds details for the reader that highlight that component of it. We're setting sail for Italy. Paul is entrusted to a centurion who happens to be of the Augustan cohort, and that is there's some evidence of an Augustan cohort in Syria, the Roman province of Syria at the time, but it's a cohort of soldiers that derive their name from their association with, like, the Imperial Guard, and the main guy's name is Julius, which, for any reader, I mean, there's some famous Juliuses around lurking in the background historically. So even the soldier himself might have been a freedman who was adopted into a family and took on that name. So there are all of these little signals reminding the reader that this is all part of the plan, the appeal to Caesar, and there's these details in here that you would only know if you'd been there.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about sailing, so there's even some vocabulary in here that I'm not exceptionally familiar with. Contextually, you can figure out what some of it means if you just read the whole chapter. But if you are into sailing and you have lived on a coastal place, the details here, I'm sure, are quite entertaining and riveting.
It also, I think, for Luke, remember he's the only Gentile writer in the New Testament. The notion of a sea voyage is really a deep theme in the Greco-Roman imagination, right? The epic poems of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and even Virgil's Aeneid have this component to it. So maybe to a pagan ear, Paul appears as a divinely vindicated hero in this to someone with a pagan set of ears as well. So what were some things about it, just sailing trivia that struck you? You said to find out a little bit more about.
I mean, there's weather terms in here. I've heard of northeaster. Mm-hmm. That was a familiar. But talking about lowering the gear, throwing over the tackle, just several terms there that I don't necessarily know the specifics, but I get the gist of what's going on.
Or the lee.
The lee, yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, that's like using the mountains to block the wind. And even in Greece today, when you go to a Greek island and it's really windy, you don't want to go to a beach where it's too windy, but the locals will know other beaches on the island that are shielded from the wind coming in that direction. So when we read that they take this ship whose port city is Adramyttium, they go along the coast of Asia. They're accompanied by Aristarchus, who's one of his companions that we read about in Acts 20, and they put in Sidon, and they're going along the coast under the lee of Cyprus, so they're going down underneath Cyprus because of the force of the winds, and then they kind of tack along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, and this is a sailing technique. As we read later in the chapter, they are sailing late in the season, and this makes sea travel more dangerous. Luke tells us later in the chapter it was after the time of the fast, which is the Day of Atonement. So they would be going around, moving up the coast of Israel, modern-day Lebanon, and then tacking alongside the southern coast of Turkey, partly to be shielded from bad weather, and also being able to just stop and get supplies at the port cities. That's also the place where Pompey the Great had to fight his campaigns against pirates, because there are lots of places to sort of hide in there and then come in. They stop at the city in verse 5 of Myra, and just this is chronologically speaking later in Christian history. The bishop of Myra is the original Nicholas, who is the original Saint Nicholas. Santa Claus is actually, and the caricature of Santa Claus is based on the historical reality of a Christian leader named Nicholas, who was the leader of the Christian community in Myra. So his bones are still there in the museum. He's also the guy who punched out the Arian heretic at the Council of Nicaea later in Christian history, which when Arian floated that Jesus was a created being, and the original Santa Claus just couldn't take it, so he went over and just punched him out. Which puts some muscle into Deck the Halls at Christmas, doesn't it? It just does. But we're a little ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah, we are. So, a little off course.
Yeah, bring it back.
Well, in the midst of all this detail about where they're going and how they're getting there and what they're dealing with and sailing terminology, Paul speaks several times, almost prophetically. In verse 10, he says, this voyage is not going to go well. We could lose not only the cargo and the ship, but our own lives. And nobody pays attention to that. Things get worse. And I love, you get to verse 24, and Paul has a vision. And this angel of God says, don't be afraid. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. Yeah. So I read that, and I hear Paul has been praying for all of these people on the boat. He's warned them this is not going to go well. He's been praying, Lord, these guys are making bad decisions. And now God answers his prayer and says, nobody's going to die.
That's just so powerful.
It is.
And
and there's 276 of them on board, we learn later. So it's a big group of people.
It's a large, right? The travel takes them to Crete. It's my favorite island to visit, and just a breathtakingly beautiful place. Best food on the planet. 8 of the top 10 beaches in Europe are in Crete, and the largest gorge in Europe is in Crete. So we've taken a 10-hour hike, start in the mountains, hike down, and you end up at the Mediterranean at the end. It's just a beautiful place. And they go to they reach this place called Fair Havens, which is on the southern coast of Crete, but it's a small place, and they're not able really to winter there. And so, at this point, they have switched vessels. And back up in verse 6, Julius the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy. So these are like the super tankers or the super cargo ships of the first century world. Rome to Alexandria, and the rapid route is a 7-day trip. And Alexandria is where Rome actually imports the largest amount of its grain to feed the city. So Rome has a deep economic interest in maintaining this shipping route, And the direct route is 7 days, but when you go later in the season, you have to take this northern route around Turkey. And so they are on one of these large Alexandrian grain ships at this moment. And so the harbor at Fair Havens is too small. They're thinking, well, let's hope that we can reach the harbor of Phoenix, which would be suitable to spend the winter there. And so, they seems like, okay, let's try to just push it. Again, Luke says it's after the fast, so the season, like the seas are closed, and we don't know the exact date, but it's probably around AD 59. So the Day of Atonement in AD 59 is on October 5th, and so it's late in the fall. They have a wind that seems favorable, and yet as soon as they get out there, the storm hits, and it hits hard, and they have no choice. Like, they're not able to turn around and get back. They've got no choice, and this is terrifying. The text says we couldn't face the wind, so we just gave ourselves to it, and just let this wind just drive us along. And they rip past this small island. The ESV calls it Kauda. It's Gavdos in Greece today. It's the southernmost place of Europe, and it's a small island, beautiful place today. They're able to just barely keep the lifeboat there. They try to undergird the ship, and yet they're just violently driven along. 3 days, just think of that, like 3 days. So they're like 72 hours just being pummeled. And, when it's dark in the Mediterranean at night today, you get a little ambient light from other vessels or lights on an island. But when it's dark, it's pitch black now.
Yeah, they can't see anything.
And not only can they not see anything, they don't know what direction they're going exactly, and they also know that there's a lot of other things to run into out there as well. So it's a terrifying experience. They throw the tackle of the ship overboard, trying to lighten it, and we read that neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and all hope was abandoned. So that's intense.
Yeah.
This is an intense shipwreck, and like you said, it's something that the Lord is watching over, and they hadn't eaten. And I guess there's a little part of me that resonates in verse 21. Paul says, "You should have listened to me."
Yeah.
There's a little.
He does take a little dig there.
There's a you should have listened to me, but he doesn't leave him there, right? Doesn't triumph over that.
Yeah.
And he shares what the Lord has shown him. And I think this is of deep encouragement to him. But don't you love that he doesn't just say, like, you should have listened to me, God's going to save my life, but not yours. I mean, that would have discredited his whole ministry.
Yeah, he's been praying for, and he has a heart for all of the people that are on board. So Paul the evangelist never stops being the evangelist.
Right. It reminds me of earlier in Acts 16 when he's in the Roman prison, and there's an earthquake, and the chains fall, and the doors are open, but he doesn't leave.
Yeah,
because there's work, and so I love that he intercedes. This is just so powerful. He intercedes for his own life, but also he's praying for the life of everybody on the boat. One of my heroes in life was a man named J. Christy Wilson, and he was a missionary in Afghanistan for most of his life. And I met him after he was kicked out of Afghanistan, and he ended up teaching at Gordon Conwell in missions. And he tells the story of flying in Afghanistan and having mechanical problems with the plane in midair over Afghanistan. And the pilot basically came on the communication system and told everyone, we're having problems with the plane and we're probably going to crash into the mountains. And so Christy Wilson was a passenger. So what did he do? He just felt this overwhelming responsibility for the salvation of everyone on the plane. And so he stood up in the plane and just preached the gospel to everyone on the plane and said, folks, looks like we're going to be crashing into the mountains soon. And so he just led the people on the plane to trust in Christ. And then and after he was finished, he sat back down. He was just kind of getting ready to meet with the Lord, and they were looking out the windows, and it was just couldn't see anything. It was dark, and then out of nowhere, the lights of a secondary airport just like lit up, and they safely landed. And
wow!
So it reminds me of this scene. So the Lord watches over them, and 14 nights go past, and so we're going to have to pick up the rest of this in our next episode. 14 nights driving through a storm, not eating.
Unable to see at night.
Yeah, no stars, no sun. And so
it would be kind of like riding in a car blindfolded.
For 14 days.
14 days.
Through the mountains.
Yeah.
That's a great visual picture. And the people, the men traveling suspected we got to be getting close to something at this point. Well, let's pick up the ending of this account in our next episode, and powerful lesson of trusting God even when you can't see anything around you, and not just thinking of yourself.
Yeah. That's a good word.
So, well, we'll pause here with a cliffhanger and pick it up in our next episode. And thanks everyone for joining us on the Word Revealed. Join us for the part 2 of the Shipwreck. And thanks for joining us on our journey through the book of Acts together. So
good to be with you, David. Good to be with all of you.
Thank you for joining Dr. David Palmer, Senior Pastor at Kenwood Baptist Church in Cincinnati, and Scott Burns, Associate Pastor. Meet us here next time for another conversation on the Bible.